Hello, my name is Jacob Gardner, and I'll be discussing the NCAA transfer portal. The landscape of college athletics is drastically changing, and the transfer portal being one of the biggest tools used by the NCAA to change this landscape. The transfer portal is essentially a digital method for student athletes to transfer from school to school, and just recently without any penalties. The reason the transfer portal is such a huge topic of controversy is because its rules and accessibility for student athletes and coaching staff have many pros and cons. Um, you know, I can change the outcome of a season immediately, but is being overused and abused. I myself am a student athlete here at CSU, and I've used the transfer portal, so I'm decently aware of the applications of it and the consequences that can happen. But before I get into this, I'd like to explain some of the background in terms of eligibility, so everything is a little bit more clear. Obviously, to start with, all student athletes have 4 years of eligibility. A redshirt year is typically used at the beginning of a student athlete's career to either train or become more mature and experienced with the whole college atmosphere, and become, just a more bigger and better player. So the way in football it works is if you play in more than 4 games, then you count one of those 4 years of eligibility, meaning once you hit that 5th game, that's a year used. But you can still play in 4 games and still maintain a redshirt year and still have 4 years. I'd like to talk about the reasons people transfer. It could be anywhere from they don't feel like they're getting enough playing time to the politics of the coaching staff. Maybe it's the atmosphere of the school. There's many different reasons why people move schools. And then there's also a thing called a COVID year, which is essentially the NCAA thought that it was unfair that some people had to opt out the COVID year and still use one of the years of eligibility. So they granted all players in the NCAA an extra COVID year, which means they get an extra year of eligibility. This comes into play when we start talking about the sheer amounts of players in the transfer portal and how those scholarships affect freshmen, or rather high school recruits. So first, I'd like to talk about the pros. Students control the future now. Just how coaches aren't penalized for leaving institutions whenever they want for better paying jobs, neither are students. The NCAA granted a first year transfer, a first free transfer, meaning that they don't have to sit out a year if they transfer schools like it was in the past. CBSSports.com says there are reasons no player should be bound forever to a school, such as coaching and personnel changes. The two hosts agreed on that. Bell noted that he doesn't think a kid makes a poor decision at 17 years old and he should be punished for it. Players might be stuck behind highly skilled other players and have no playing time. Situation may be political and they feel stuck with a certain coach. Athletes can go to a school who better reflects their skill, whether that be, they're better or worse than what they had originally thought of themselves. DraftDiamonds.com says if you are a small school and moving up, it eliminates the level of competition wherein some NFL teams may have when it comes to your play. Another pro for the transfer portal is staffs can fill rosters with more mature players in a single offseason, meaning you can change around the whole trajectory of your program within a single year and become a conference champion contender. A pro for the student athletes is the staffs have to try harder to keep the players at their school. There's no more broken promises where coaches, I promise you to, give you this amount of playing time, and then it's not there because, well, you have no power to change your outcome of your college experience. So some cons. There's too many players in the portal. When it comes down to it, there's a large majority of players who they enter the transfer portal and they don't find a home, and this is multiplied by when you add a COVID year, meaning all these old 5th year guys who had their red shirt 4 years of eligibility, and then you add the COVID year, you have all these really mature, experienced players who now other schools want to pick up, but that doesn't leave any scholarship room for the younger players coming out of high school. So on top of younger players not being able to be recruited, now you're having older, 24, 25-year-old dudes who are getting picked up, and they're taking the scholarship spots of these recruits. Another con is can leave teams in a bad position due to players leaving and staffs not be able to fill these roles during season. We've seen this at CSU here recently, where coaches cannot pick up student athletes in the middle of their season, but they can, but the players can leave, penalty free, and there's no one to fill those voids and the roles that those players had. A big one would be it's harder for lower level programs to build something great now. BallStateDaily.com says, I believe the transfer portal could take away from the growth of the program and its culture due to good players leaving during the good times. It's hard to keep growing on a standard that you set for a program with good players. Like I explained before, it takes scholarships away from high school players since there are better and more experienced players from the portal to draw from and create a more experienced, mature roster. COVID year has a lot more people to find, and there's not enough people. There's too many people in transfer portal with all those older guys that I was talking about before, to where these new recruits can't find any scholarships. The shorthorn.com says, she said, COVID-19 caused an issue because the athletes playing last year earned an extra year of eligibility. She expects student athletes to crowd the portal for the next 2 years. That's the big points and the pros and cons of the transfer portal. Some questions I have myself, being one of those students, is what is a way to create a more effective transfer portal? There's so many rules on it right now, but they're not limiting players from coming. They're just limiting the way that it happens in a way, and there's so many loopholes that they cannot be covered in a single video. Another question, even if the cons outweigh the pros, would it still be necessary to provide the tool to athletes on moral grounds? Meaning, even if the cons do outweigh the pros, like, would it still be fair to not have the student athletes have that opportunity that we're granted right now in this moment? How much more will the transfer portal be changed in the future, or if at all, in your opinion? I don't know how much I can see it changing in the future. Maybe there's a couple rules and regulations that they put in place to just limit the sheer amount of players that are in the portal at this moment. But at the moment, that's all I could really imagine. In conclusion, the transfer portal is a place where dreams can be discovered or broken. It offers students their own freedom, but at a very heavy price. And same goes for coaches too. They can fill a roster with mature and experienced players, but at the same time, they can become conference contenders. But it can also be very hard to build up a program if you have all these good players leaving. So there's many pros and cons, but I appreciate you listening, and I'm happy to hear back. Thank you.